Analyzing the mentality of the Cylons' need to destroy every single colonial is an intriguing proposition. After the fall of the 12 colonies, also known as the Colonial Holocaust, a little over 50,000 survivors would try to escape and leave the nuclear wasteland that they once called home. The Cylons determined that humanity could not be allowed to survive, that an extinction-level event was required. If the colonials were permitted to leave, their children would come back and exact revenge on the faux humans. It's a really ironic stance when you consider how the colonies were established and the history of those that came before. A conversation for another time, to be sure. The colonials, for their part, had been completely demoralized, beaten. Memorials on ships would begin to form with pictures of loved ones being pinned to the walls. You would walk through hallways on the Galactica and possibly other ships and see who was killed or missing, grave sites of a kind. So with 50,298 people, at least at last count, the colonials made their way for Earth. Or at least they believed they were, told by a lying commander that Earth actually existed. We can't be sure exactly when it started, but we do know that pretty quickly into the colonial exile, the Cylons would appear to have the ability to track the refugee ships. The destroyers of humanity appearing every 33 minutes after the colonials had jumped away. While many reviewers of this series discuss the toll on the colonials, something I'm definitely going to get into shortly, and it is a major part, so don't take that wrong, I really don't see a lot of discussion on the equipment failures that began to occur. Not only were the humans being worn out, but the jump drives and other technologies made by colonials was beginning to fail. We see this in the computer systems needing to be rebooted and jump drives simply not working. From what we observe, the Cylons don't appear to have these issues. It's subtle, but it seems to hint that perhaps the monotheistic culture had developed superior computer technology. Though, to be fair, we are dealing with a very old warship, and the other vessels are all civilians. That said, I'll be the first to admit that technology, while beginning to fail, was not the worst of the colonials' problems. The human element was much worse. Beyond being tired to a degree that mistakes were beginning to occur on the regular, they also began questioning everything. The lack of sleep was starting to affect them mentally, with some having paranoia. An example of this would be Kaylee when she begins questioning the specific timing. I mean, why is it 33 minutes that the Cylon attacks? Why not 34 or 32? For 5 days and 237 jumps, the Cylons continued to chase them. The Galactica and civilian crew under constant attack. The crew would only be able to have 10 to 15 minutes of sleep if they were lucky, most of them being forced to take drugs just to keep up. Nerves would fray, the command structure slowly being challenged and breaking down. Something that I do want to note is that there was a scene that's really interesting, but unfortunately was cut and thus not considered canon. According to SF Debris, at one point there is an officer breaking down the death toll and what has occurred. Due to executive meddling, a line that breaks down the amount of suicides that were occurring on the ship was removed from the scene. I think this was a mistake as it adds more depth and reality to the situation. It's not enough to be living in a hell where almost everyone is dead or going to die, but to be hunted without sleep. There would be people who would want to opt out. It would be a very real problem. Again, just something to note of lost opportunity. Though back to the story, real problems would be shown at Jump 238. The fleet would lose at least one civilian ship, the Olympic carrier. This would take the stress to another level, with Officer Duwali saying she thought she had counted all of them, and the executive officer, also known as the ship drunk, Ty, yelling at her, letting her know that it wasn't good enough. He would tell the entire bridge crew, all of the officers, that he knew they were tired. He knew that they hadn't had a lot of sleep, but it didn't matter. He still expected for them to do their jobs. Personally, I find Adama's speech more impactful, though I think them working in tandem with a hot and cold method of reprimand being done on purpose. After being yelled at by Ty, Adama would quietly continue his work and say audible enough where everyone could hear, but with no heat, "We make mistakes, people die, and there aren't many of us left. Carry on." Something very powerful that required no yelling. Though, after this occurring and 33 minutes passing, no Cylons would show up. The Colonials would begin trying to get rest, taking advantage of the downtime so that they can be more prepared for the next inevitable attack. Unfortunately, they wouldn't get much sleep as another ship would appear on Dratus. though luckily it would be the Olympic carrier that would suddenly appear. While some are thankful about this, the commander would set the ship to condition 1, resetting the clock to 33 minutes. Adama would be going on a hunch that the Cylons were tracking them through the Olympic carrier itself. While interacting with the wayward vessel, Galactica would ask the ship to stop its forward momentum and asked how they survived with the Cylons for over 3 hours. When the carrier can't explain it, Adama orders that the civilian ship be jammed. After this, the carrier would make a mad dash for the Galactica and nuclear materials would be detected on it, even though that's not how it actually works when it comes to detecting nuclear materials, but we'll just go with it. The commander and president would discuss the options when it comes to the ship itself, including evacuating the personnel aboard the vessel. However, it's theorized that it may not be the ship being tracked, but someone on it. Another curiosity. When discussing if the ship should be destroyed or not, Apollo looks into the windows to see if he can see anyone. He states that he doesn't see anyone there. We never really know, and it's left ambiguous if someone is there or not, but unfortunately, it's that way because of the network. The original plan was for the ship to actually have people on it, to make the decision even more horrific. But again, we would lose sight of greatness, and no one ever knows if there were people on it or not. Whether the ship has civilians on it or not, we'll honestly never know, but personally, I can see both arguments. The Cylons taking people as prisoners for experiments makes sense, or perhaps leaving them on there since the carrier had already been infiltrated since day 1. Honestly, I think one is as likely as the other. None of it would matter though, as Lee ultimately destroys the vessel to save the fleet, something that would come to torment him and stay with him throughout the series. That said, this act would save all of the civilians and the Galactica and give them some respite. After everything was said and done, after the event, after miscounts and recounts, the total civilian population would be 47,972 left. Well, 47,973 as a baby was born that morning. It's ironic, and I absolutely love the acting here because it does show how this little action, one person being born, does give some hope. This is the beginning of a very long and very arduous journey. Stay tuned as we look at how things that are taken for granted can become a huge issue, like water. Don't forget to comment, rate, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Lore Reloaded.